Anyone else want to share? Andrew, usually you have something.
What was the question? I got in
Favorite
here 2 minutes late.
most recent show or movie or anything you've been watching recently?
Oh, I definitely love Shrinking. Big, big fan. That's one of my favorite shows.
Who is that with?
Um, it's Jason Segel.
Oh,
It also has Harrison Ford. Um, yeah.
that's
It's so
right.
good.
Is it good,
It's
Aaron? Yeah.
funny, and you'll cry. You'll cover all the emotions in it. And
I
Harrison
think
Ford
I'd
is an amazing comedic actor.
so good. His character is phenomenal. Like written well and just played even like acted even better.
Michael J. Fox is making an appearance this season.
Hmm.
Yeah. Shout out to these actors coming back. Like doing some things that we didn't expect. That's cool.
It's like Apple TV just has such great shows in general.
What are your hits? Like, what's your like top two or three?
Slow Horses is fantastic. Highly recommend. That's another one that has Gary Oldman, and he does like such a great job in like as just a hilarious character. Um, Ted Lasso, obviously, I feel like everyone has heard of or seen. Not Tess Lasso. Um, what's another one? I'll have to get back to you with more.
Okay, well, Andrew, I know it's a Thursday afternoon for those of you on the East Coast, Thursday morning for those of us on the West Coast, Best Coast, I should say. And I'm really excited to share today for Mandala's programming. We have an advisor to Mandala and a former participant in some of our programming, but is now the CTO of Talkiatry. And we've been talking about difficult conversations since basically the day we've met, Kat. And just for people who are joining us, video off, totally no pressure to be video on, but we obviously love seeing your faces. We're going to structure this in two parts. So the part one is we're going to actually talk to Kat, and it'll feel like more like a podcast style Q&A where we're going to get to know Kat, her journey into being a CTO and having to have difficult conversations. Y'all can feel very comfortable asking questions to Kat. And then the second half of this, we'll share some content. We've got some slides, we've got a Mentimeter that we use to actually interact with people. And Kat and I will be leaning in there. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce to this group someone who is not new to the mental health tech ecosystem, the CTO of Talkiatry, Kat Miller. So,
Yeah. Hey
Kat.
everyone. Yeah, it's unusual that I don't have to explain what Talkiatry is, but I think to this group I don't. So I'm CTPO there. I've been at Talkiatry since September 24. Prior to that, I was CTO at Flatiron Health, which is an oncology data analytics company where I was at for 10 years. And my training and background is engineering. So that's how I came into the tech ecosystem. But at this point, have a couple rounds of senior leadership under my belt.
Um, well, let's jump into that. I guess before we talk about difficult conversations, tell me more about conversations in general and what you think like the role of management often is in terms of feedback, conversation loops, what you've learned before we get into the difficult part.
I mean, I think it's a very common joke that the role of management is to tell people to talk to each other. And I do think that management plays like a connector role. And so that like alignment is a huge one. It's something that I think I didn't fully appreciate until I got to like a very senior role and I could see across everything and realize how much it matters for everyone to be operating in the same way or pulling in the same direction. And so I think alignment is a really huge one. Um, but then there's like the day to day, like I'm seeing these things at every level as a manager, you just see things that other people can't see. And so it's like, hey, connecting, it's a puzzle, connecting point A to point B. Conversation is usually the way to do it. And then the other thing I would say is, like there are so many problems that you can solve by getting people in a room that you literally can't solve in any other way. Virtual room, physical room. I'm not super opinionated, but I just like had so many situations that were like devolving over email, over Slack, over I don't know, nothing. And like I think there's a lot of power in getting humans together and like calling out the thing that is happening and working through it in a way that people can't hide from it.
So now it feels like you're at the CTO level. You're able to you have to have conversations with people who have to have conversations with their teams. Let me jump us back to that first time you got the software engineering leader to software engineering manager at Flatiron Cat. When you had to have your first difficult conversation, what do you remember about that? What was that like?
Well, I don't remember. I mean, I don't necessarily remember the first, but I remember the first time I didn't have one that I really, really should have had. I was managing, I guess I technically a director maybe. I had a team under me that it was a toil team. If you've ever had one of those, like it's a team where like the work was fun for about a year, people would be interested in it, and then it just kind of kept being the same over and over again. And it was hard to staff, it was hard to keep people. And I knew that the leader of that team was like done. She had made it very clear that like she wanted a new role, but she and I were both being nice about it. Right? I knew that I needed to replace her. I was working on it. She needed to like she wanted to change. And it was just taking a really long time. And we said all these things, like we couch all these things in vague sense of like, oh, how are you doing? But I never like directly asked, like, how long can you continue to do this? Or like, are you going to quit if I don't solve this in X period of time? Because I really didn't want to hear the answer. And then of course I didn't know the answer. And so when it happened, it like really erupted on me. So that's the thing that it's not the same kind of difficult conversation as having to tell someone that they're not performing, but it was the avoiding of a thing that I didn't a feeling that I didn't want to have, like a pain that I didn't want to have, that was so like that I had to pay the piper for, basically, that has like really cemented in my mind why I cannot and should not avoid those conversations.
Well, I feel like intellectually, I know exactly what you talk about. I'm talking about avoiding that. It feels almost tempting to avoid the difficult chat, Cat. But I'm curious, how did you get the muscle to start to have lean into that? What did it take? Do you have a story of the opposite of that?
So I would say, first of all, I'm definitely, this is not easy for me. Like I am avoidant of conflict by nature, and my body definitely registers difficult conversations as conflict or wants to register it. That's like its first, if I have to tell someone that on a pip, to me, it immediately raises the conflict flag. And I'm like, nope, don't want to do that. So my general strategy is to box myself in. So it's really easy for me anyway, if I'm in like a weekly one-on-one and like one of the things I want to raise is like, hey, that meeting last week didn't go that well. It's like pretty easy to just not do that. The consequences are low and or like the immediate consequences are low. There's plenty of other stuff to talk about, and it's very easy to just kind of let that slide and think, oh, maybe we'll talk about it next week. And so if there's a conversation that I really need to have, I think there's two parts to it. I mean, that are related. It's teaching myself why I have to have it. It's convincing myself that it is actually important, and getting very crisp about like potential consequences, right? So it's feelings to me, sure, but it's also if I'm gonna have a like a hey, you're on the path to a pip conversation with someone, some of the bad consequences are they could get very angry and they could do bad things to the organization. They could, make things really bad on their team. So there is some potential real consequence there. And so I need to believe that the value is greater than the downside, practically speaking, like not for me personally, but like for the business. And then it really helps me to, so like now I'm convinced I do have to have it. Like I don't get to avoid it. I don't get to like write it off. And then it helps me to basically box myself in by telling other people I'm going to have it. Maybe that's a manager, maybe that's my coach, maybe that's my HRBP. I actually love my HRBPs usually, and I love using them for this, which is one, like they'll help me kind of talk through it, but then they'll also kind of hold me accountable. So now I've boxed myself in where if I don't have this conversation, I've both convinced myself that that's really bad for the company, and two, there's at least one person who knows that I was supposed to do it, and I will let my natural sense of guilt push me into it.
Well, maybe you can bring us into a real life one. You don't have to name the name, but is there a story you'd be willing to share of a difficult conversation you had to have recently? And what was your process? Talk us through the all the emotions and the thoughts that went into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the form of difficult conversation for me lately actually hasn't been performance related, although I think those are the most common across the board. But they've been like hard business decisions that people don't want to hear, right? Like just I don't want to get into like too much specifics, but basically a conversation with the exec team saying like, I know you want this to come out this way, and I do not think it's possible. That's a situation where I think writing and preparation was really important. Again, still like convincing myself, do I have to have this conversation? Like, is this conversation best had with individuals? Is this conversation best had with groups, like in a group setting? And how are people going to feel, et cetera. So I think there's maybe some difference in the executive level when you're talking about like things like that. So I don't want to go too far off the rails in that direction, but basically having to tell the exec team, hey, like we all thought that this thing was going to happen this way and it would have this impact, and like, hey, that's not happening. And so like the thing that we were banking on in this particular area isn't going to work, and we're going to need to find something else.
Hmm.
And like depending on your exec team, that can feel really safe or really scary. Um, One of the things for me is the longer I wait to have that conversation, the scarier it gets. So the other, I think, tactic I take on those kinds of things is like I try to unburden myself early and often because it eats at me, and also because the longer you go without having it, the harder it gets. Like, and this is true for performance conversations, right? The longer it's been since that meeting where the bad thing happens, the like weirder and harder it is to have it. And so I think there's also a like speed component here. How quickly can I get my ducks in a row and just like rip off the band-aid?
Yeah, I just want to relate to this. I had to have a difficult conversation last night, and I noticed that the longer I was waiting, it took about 9 months for us to eventually have it. And I noticed that the amount of relational debt and the interest that that debt had accrued in the 9 months is actually way bigger than the principal. So if you're still with me on the metaphor, it was actually not even about the issue. It was much more about the things we hadn't discussed related to that issue and how those things started to spiral. Um, Kat, what's your process? What do you do? I mean, you sounds like you have a accountability around this is a big part
Yep.
of it for you. How do you think about like the day of? It's a 10:30, you have your one-on-one, you got to talk. What's the cat routine?
So I like to review my meetings every morning. So like I if I have time. And so ideally I'm going through every meeting of the day generally and saying like what do I need to have prepped for this? And so I will I will make sure that's sort of written down somewhere. So sometimes you can keep mental to-do lists. This is one area where a physical to-do list is very helpful to me. And I will write down at the very least bullet points of what I want to say. I'll do like a situation behavior impact if this is a feedback conversation. Like I said, if it's like a metrics aren't going the right way or my team screwed up conversation, I might need to gather sort of different data, but I'll try to have as much like written down some possibly just for me. Like in some situations, it makes sense to have written for the other person, but let's take this as like a not that version of a conversation. I'll have it written down for me. So partially so that if I panic in the moment, I can just read off the screen like there's a backup. And it makes it feel less stressful, right? I did a lot of theater, and the thing that's most stressful for me when I'm doing the theater is if I'm not totally memorized, and like every minute I'm not just worried about am I doing a good job, but I'm also like, do I know the next word? And like so having that comfort of like, oh, at least I can't screw up the words, or at least like there's a backup if I screw up the words is really helpful. Um, I think some people probably like to have a gap before it. I probably want like 2 minutes, but I don't actually want like a huge amount of time before it, because then I'll just get in my head about it. So I actually don't do a ton of like mental or like physical preparation for it, other than that really like writing it down. And I'm realizing as I say this probably that I'm a person who like plays out scenarios as I write. So like the writing isn't just like bullet points. I'm like imagining myself saying it. Like when maybe I do this when you do a presentation, right? When I give a presentation, I might run through it 2 or 3 times, but I've like rehearsed it in my head walking to the park like 50 times. And a little bit that's what's going on when I'm like with these things as well. I've rehearsed them in my head and I'm writing down the pieces out of that. So that's really only kind of my main framework there is that I make sure there's something written so that I can't squirm out of it. And then I mentioned the accountability piece if I need it, which I often do. It's like making sure that someone else knows and also approves, by the way. Like it is backing myself into a corner, but it's also a like a helpful gut check of like, do I have to do this hard thing? Like, is there another way around this? Like, am I overreacting? And for my particular makeup, I it's very helpful for me to like have another human being say like, yeah, Kat, sure sounds like that's a thing you need to do. So that's part of the where the accountability comes from as well, or that the help comes from is like that like extra check that like, yeah, this is what I need to be doing.
Super cool. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to pause here before we jump into the next part. But folks on the call who may be curious, have some questions, would you be willing to come off mute and either share your experience, what resonated, or ask a question or two to someone who's had to do this for the last several years and is doing it, I'm sure, as we speak at Talkiatry. So if folks want to come off mute, feel free. You don't need to raise your hand. So feel free to come off. If there's two people at the same time, then you'll play rock, paper, scissors or something. But yeah, go for it. Any questions?
I actually had to have like a similar conversation with my wife yesterday. Not that, she was having a problem with me, but she was having a problem with one of her newer hires. And she was really pushing away from having to have the conversation. And I'm like, okay, you already have like 12 instances in writing. If you have to go to HR or, your people team, they're going to ask you, why haven't you had the conversation? So think of it that way. Like you need to make these steps in order to make any more steps. So it's like you're saying, where it's accountability. Like I can't do my job until I do my job in having this hard conversation. And she really like resonated with that because otherwise she would have put it off and put it off and put it off. And then it potentially spirals into something that could have been handled a lot easier in the beginning versus becoming a much bigger problem closer to the end.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And also, I think you called out something really valuable, which is the like, how does this look if I just take the facts? How does it look? Or like, how would it read if I don't have the conversation versus if I do? I think that's really powerful. Like if you just kind of ask like, what would HR think if I if they just had to be told this story by a neutral third party? That's I think a really powerful tool to too.
Yeah, or to think of it as, this person is underperforming. What would my team think if I was letting them slide just because I didn't want to have that conversation? Is that letting them down? And then you sort of let your own shame take over, like you were saying before, where you're like, I don't want to let anybody down in this process. So it's better to do the hard thing and rip off the band-aid rather than waiting and having it spiral into something and or just feeling like you let your team down because you were having a double standard.
Yeah. I think another thing that this is reminding me of is I like to think about there's a couple different talks about feedback being a gift, which is really something that has stuck with me. Like feedback is like the kindest thing you can do for another person. And I think that we all resonate with that when it's like when we can give like really small specific feedback. Oh, that presentation was great. What you would have been great if you'd cut out a couple slides. Like that feels like a thing that we're comfortable doing. And so I also think that we kind of, at least I in my mind, separate like this is like a I often think like, oh, this is like a hard conversation. This is like a punitive conversation because this is like this thing was like so bad that we can't not talk about it. And if you can think about it as like several conversations, and the first is a feedback conversation, and the second is a consequences conversation, et cetera. If that makes sense for where you are and the way that your HR process works, I think that can also be helpful getting over the hump of like, okay, well, the first conversation is just a feedback conversation. I'm not pipping this person. The second conversation will be like, if it doesn't get better, it's a consequences conversation and it breaks it up a little bit to make each piece a little bit more achievable.
I really like that, Kat. I feel like you're bringing your engineering brain into segmenting a problem down into its component parts, and I'm here for it. So I just want to say I think that's a smart way. It's a good de-risking. It's a small way of taking it step by step. Colin, appreciate you for sharing. I was in your wife's position yesterday, and I wish I had had an accountability buddy to kind of talk through that. And so it's really great to hear you share your perspective. Are there other folks who are willing to either share what resonated from what Kat was saying, or maybe even ask a question either to her or to the group. Would love to encourage some conversation. So,
One question, I really like the forced accountability piece. Of just like tell someone else, and then it's like, all right, well, I told them I'd do it, so I kind of have to follow through on it now. Otherwise, I'm not someone who follows through on what I say. Um, I think a big thing that I think about is kind of constantly laying the foundation for feedback to land well. And the way that I think about that is like in every relationship, people that I work with, friends, family, partner, so on and so forth. I'm just kind of thinking about how do I make sure that when we need to have the hard conversations, we're ready and that it isn't going to be taken as like an attack, but it's like, oh, we've established the foundation in a way that um that everyone knows that's it, that everyone involved knows like we're on the same team. We're trying to come to the same that we're trying to achieve the same goal together. How do you approach that, Kat, and making sure that you've like done that work ahead of time so that that um kind of this pre-work makes it land a little bit better?
Well, it sounds like you've thought about this a lot, and I think that that's awesome. I'm actually curious what pre-work you do. Like, how do you think about that?
It's I think a lot of times it's just well, one, just like a healthy dose of like positive feedback and reiterating things over and over again. I think I'm someone that wants to say things that I mean and then say them like 5 times so that people don't think that I was just saying it once, whether that's like, hey, come to me to ask for help, or I really appreciate when you do this thing. Because I think a lot of times it's just reinforcing the positive so that if in a moment someone's like scared or they feel weird or annoying or anything, it's like, all right, well, I don't think he would have said this if he didn't really mean it. And I think a lot of it is also leading with like even if I'm having a conversation that's more difficult, um, I always lead with like, and this might come out weird, and like that's not the intention at all. But I just want to like be clear. So if anything's unclear, like definitely ask questions because my goal is just to make sure that we're on the same page. Um, to like lead with we are on the same team or like we're trying to get to the same end result together. And then after it happens, I try my best to like reinforce that that was a really good thing. Whether that's like, thanks for listening, thanks for hearing me out, thanks for engaging. Um, or if someone gives me feedback doing the exact same thing, even if they're like, hey, that thing you did was terrible, me saying thank you like 20 times to also make it easier for them. Because sometimes people are like, oh, well, I feel bad that I like said something that might have been difficult to receive. And I'm like, no, 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 that's the only way that this is going to work well. So those are a few of the things that I think about. But yeah.
I mean, I love all of that, and I think the root of it, and it certainly is for me, is like just caring about the person. Like if you actually care about the person as a human being, a lot of what you're like a lot of the things that you're doing, first of all, they'll feel it. Like we are amazing lie detectors. You know when someone's not feeling great, even when they're putting a good face on it. And so I think that genuinely caring is the root of it. I think you're talking about some great tactics, and I think it looks different. Everyone's style is a little bit different. I was thinking as you were talking about how honestly how there's a conversation I need to have right now that is one of these delayed conversations, and I have a really good relationship with the person, but they're going to be surprised because I haven't dropped the breadcrumbs. I haven't been kind of good about saying like, hey, this could have gone better, or like this small thing could have gone better, and now I have to say like, hey, this like whole project wasn't
Mhm.
great. And I think you caught hit on something that I think is really important for me personally, which is to like acknowledge my own culpability in that to say like I should have given you more feedback along the way, and like that's on me. It remains true that this project didn't go great, and like we need to talk about it. And so not I don't think I have a better answer to your question than you have to your own question, but
Mhm.
I do think it's this root of caring. And I love the kind of humility piece of it. I think that's very helpful for me because I have certainly not done everything right up to that point. There's no world in which I did everything perfectly. And so
Totally.
acknowledging that feels like it gives me the permission to have the conversation.
I think the other thing that I would add that came to mind is like a lot of I mentioned it as like pre-work, and I think it's on all of us as if we want to be good managers, good peers, it's on us to like be thoughtful about how things are going. Because I think a lot of people just get wrapped up in the execution. It's like, well, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. before you know it, 2 months have gone by and you've never had any sort of thoughtful conversation about how things are going. And you don't necessarily have actual reflections on have these things been good? Have they been bad? So I think it's on all of us to make sure that we're asking ourselves those questions and having the relevant reflections so that we actually have things to share. Because if we're not doing that, we're not setting anyone up for success. And that's time where you have to kind of sit down and even for 10 minutes and be like, what has gone well, what hasn't? But yeah.
I think this is a really good pausing point for us at the 30-minute mark. For those of you that are reflecting, nodding along, thinking, the second half will be a little bit more you going inwards and thinking about something that you have to do. And Kat and I will be sharing some slides, going through some Mentimeter stuff. And if you have questions for Kat at the back end, feel free to bring it up. And again, feel free to share whatever's coming up for you as we move along. So I'm going to drop in a quick Mentimeter link to kick things off. I would love for folks to open that up on their own desktop, or you can scan this QR code if you're interested in having it on your phone. And I'll give folks maybe 20 seconds to open the QR code on their phone or open it on their screen. And I just love to hear from the group at scale. My first question, which is, how would you describe your approach? Like, if you were to rate your sort of assessment of how you're doing right now, and it's a very binary. I know some of you are like, maybe I'm in between. I don't know, but would love to hear, do you find yourself more avoiding difficult conversations or leaning into them? And I would just love to just take a quick gut survey pulse. Again, you can use the Menti link in the Zoom chat that I just dropped in. I don't know if I dropped it in actually. Hang on. Did it come through? Yeah, okay. I think I'm going to make sure that the
I don't know if
result.
it's like open to accept results right now.
Yeah, I can't vote.
You can't vote? Okay, hang on one second. Um, you're dealing with my live. Can you still not vote? Does it say?
Oh, there we go. That works for me
Good
now.
now. Yep.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, appreciate you. Seeming pretty even so far. You can give folks a few more few more seconds to respond. While I have this open, would people be willing to share any thoughts or perspectives on where they're at? I was also assuming the same thing, Andrew.
I think for me, like this is obviously like either you do this or you do this, and I think sometimes it depends on who the conversation has to be with. I know that I've avoided some conversations, but also have leaned into to others because I know in terms of like evaluating kind of what Andrew was saying about how the feedback is going to be received and stuff. So I think sometimes it kind of varies too. There are some people that it's, in some cases it's just hard to start that conversation or to, and I'd rather actually avoid it than jumping right into it or leaning into it. So I would say the majority of the time I can lean into them, but also I think maybe if I'm um, feeling somewhat unprepared, or maybe I don't have like super good examples to give, or maybe I don't have a compliment sandwich to provide, right? Where you're like praising someone, then you give them feedback, and then you praise them at the end, right? Like if it's a particularly um, very difficult conversation that's going to happen, I might avoid it for a little bit longer than I would something that I think can be easily and well received.
Makes sense, Jesse. Are there times where you'd be willing to share like what helps you get lean into it? When are the times when you're like, yeah, I'm much more in that category?
I think that Hey, sorry, my dogs are barking. I think the leaning into it, I think the biggest thing for me is feeling prepared and knowing that it is something that I haven't put off. But again, it's also, I think about um, how I know the person and what their reaction is going to be. And so I think in those times when I'm leaning into it,
Yeah.
I typically know the person a lot better, or I've worked with them longer, or I kind of know the way that they work or their strategy, or kind of just know them better as a person in general. And so those are times kind of when I'll lean in a little bit more versus avoiding them.
It's a really good insight. I'd love to hear from both you and the group if you can on the mentee link. Then the next slide, I'm asking for the times where you find yourself avoiding them, what's your inner monologue? What's going on? Why do you think you are avoiding them? And we'd just love to hear. Again, this is totally anonymized. So seeming fearful of their reaction, feeling like you aren't seeing the full picture. So there's like, what if I get this wrong? For sure. Thanks for the first person who shared sharing. Again, drop in why you think you're avoiding them. Don't want to damage the relationship. I'm curious to see if you see any patterns that are emerging. Underprepared to have the conversation. Personal time constraints. Ooh, this one really resonated with me. Sometimes I'm such an optimist. I'm like, they'll figure it out through sheer osmosis and like being around great talent. They'll get it.
For
Uh,
sure. I've definitely been had that one as my North Star a couple times.
second guessing myself. This is feels like all the things that were going through my head. Feeling unable to participate the person's responses. Yeah. Conflict avoider by nature. It's not worth rocking the boat. Anyone noticing patterns or having any reflections as they're seeing other folks share?
It feels like it's less about the conversation itself and maybe like the things that happen as a result of that conversation.
Yeah, totally. Or things that you're feeling before the conversation. The conversation is just one of those things. Thanks for sharing, Jared.
I'm interested to see that there's at least a handful that are about sort of time and not feeling like they have the time to do it.
Yeah, I was certainly one of those that put that. And I can relate with the other individual that put not having the time to develop like a thoughtful follow-up plan. I think for me and my direct reports, when I'm going to give them any type of constructive criticism, I want to make sure that I provide them with all the support that they need to kind of curb whatever we're talking about, or I want to be able to support them. And sometimes if I feel like I don't have the personal time to really put into it right now. Maybe I am on like the last part of a project or I'm trying to finish something up. I'll avoid that conversation until I'm prepared to fully support them.
I love that. I've been in that shoes myself. There's one comment that's really resonating with me, which is I feel very avoidant when I feel like the person on the other end is not going to be emotionally regulated. I'll speak to that fear. Sometimes I worry about a really sharp reaction that's like going to be super down for myself and for them, and all these anxiety thoughts come in my head. Kat, have you ever been in those shoes where you're like, what if they, what if they don't handle it? How do you talk yourself through that?
I mean, I feel like I feel this even just like some of my one-on-ones are like the easy ones and some of them are the hard ones. Um, this one, actually, I think this isn't one for me as much. Because I've just seen it go like the opposite way than I expected, like so many times. I've seen like the calm person do weird stuff and the person who I thought would be super
Yeah.
upset be fine. That I actually I don't really play out scenarios. Like I play out how do I start the conversation, but I think that what actually helps me is like letting myself off the hook for everything that happens after I introduce the information. I think this has like been a big unlock in my life of like not feeling like I have to solve everything. And I feel okay going into a conversation not knowing what the outcome is, but uh knowing that the outcome of that conversation is that they have the information and that then I want to hear what they're gonna bring to the table. What they're, everything is shaped by how they respond and you can't know. So you can't prep that or you can't fully prep that.
One common denominator that, so some of you might know this, but we work with a chief neuroscience officer. He's the head of neuroscience at Wharton, and he studies leaders and their brains all the time. And one of the common things he's always telling me is perfectionism is a crazy big disease in managers. Managers actually feel often the need to say things perfectly, write it perfectly, be perfect, lest they get anything wrong. So their brain will come up with a million reasons why to feel avoidant, because there could be a whole set of reasons. But so often when we make connection to choice, things just get better, even if it's imperfect. And so what you're going to see on the next few slides are actually some guidelines and some thinking from our team, and we're happy to share these slides for you. We'll come back to Mentimeter in a moment. Um, I guess the first point we want to start with is this is a difficult experience because your brain is feeling the threat. And there's a number of different neurobiological mechanisms at play, but our brain, when we are in conflict, tend to get hijacked by the amygdala. So the amygdala is the fight or flight fear direction of our brain. Our body tends to get flooded with cortisol when we have to have these conversations. And so suddenly we shut down. And often when we are not regulated, that actually creates the other person picking up on our experience. So mirror neurons, essentially, they're mirroring our behaviors. So when we're walking in with anxiety or feeling of fear, they pick up on that and the conversation tends to experience itself more as a threat. So how do we calm that down? What are the different things we can do? Kat and I always joke about this, but this is sort of your job. It's an underwritten part of the manager contract. But when you think about stepping from IC to manager, one of the things that often is required for us, incumbent upon us, is leaning into these moments, right? And remembering that perfectionism in this context actually really does hold us back. There is no such thing as a perfect, difficult conversation. There will always be one or two things that could have gotten better, and that's just also part of the job. Kat, I remember you told me a story about your mentor at Flatiron, and she said something to you like, if I don't have two difficult conversations every week, then I failed. Does that resonate? Do you remember
I
you?
I had a boss. This is so interesting to me. I had a boss who uh who really leaned into difficult conversations. And I think she got to the point of she's like, I'm trying to have a difficult conversation every day. And I'm sure that was like spanned the gamut of like really, really hard to like not that hard. But her point was like, I want to do something uncomfortable every single day. And she said it got so much easier that it really like the repetition really, really helped. And I'm sure some of it was like you get out of, you get the habit, you get out of the perfection. But yeah, she did it every day, and I thought that was amazing. And I mimicked her for a while, and then I fell out of the habit, and now I'm scared of it again. So recommend if you can keep it up.
I'm going to share the slides with folks who are like, I'd love to see this after. So dropping it in the slide deck, in the Zoom chat now. But there are 5 steps that we've outlined that you can try to take, and we'll walk through them together. Each of them kind of help anchor the moment that you have to have this conversation, and then even after. I think it was Jared that said, the fears were really not about the delivery; it was about everything else. So let's talk about everything else. The first step we argue that really drives a difficult conversation to be more impactful, more at ease, is actually preparation. And here, Kat, you mentioned you write. Sometimes for those of you that are using our AI coach, you can just drop a voice memo and talk it through. It can be super helpful to just have like a anonymous agent listen. I've used this a lot for this. But we try to answer 5 questions. Like, why are we having this conversation? Sometimes it's the thing that's most forgotten is like, what's the anchoring note, North Star? Kat, you and I have talked about like what's the outcome, right? Forget about what you want to say, how you want to say it. What needs to change? What's the thing that needs to be different now, right? And then starting to analyze from there, like, hey, what's the case? What's the reasoning? What's the sort of observations you're making? It does also really help to sit down and understand like what are the things that you know about this person, maybe how they've handled feedback, how they like to receive it. And of course, naming how you're feeling. And this is actually the part that we really feel proud of at Mandala. As many of you guys know, who've been through our programming, so much of our work is around emotional regulation. The final act of preparation is just saying, I'm nervous. I'm feeling confused. I'm struggling. I'm feeling these things. And in the preparation process, answering and reflecting on these questions can really help settle down your nervous system and help you begin. So, Kat, I don't know if anything jumps at you from this, but I'll just pause as I
I
like.
love the last part. I often think about I don't even know where it comes from, but the idea of like I can do hard things as a mantra is one that I struggle with, but I do think it like really applies here. Is like I can do hard things. I will get through this. Like it will be okay somehow.
We'll continue to invite. If any of these questions feel helpful or some things people are already doing that they're open to sharing, feel free to come off mute. So I'll keep pausing, no pressure. Going to keep the train moving to pause, step two. Yes, the moment before a conversation to regulate your nervous system, obviously writing how you're feeling can help, but also some kind of breathing exercise, like a little quick 30-second deep breath, right? Calming down your body allows your body to be present to what actually needs to unfold. I remember there was a manager that I had that just did this. And sometimes it was a little awkward. They would do it before the meeting. They'd be like, hey, can I take a quick second to breathe? And they would do it. And then suddenly people were like all present versus a manager that I remember that was toggling Slack notifications, had their phone out, was jumping off the previous one-on-one where they had a bunch of context they were carrying. Funnily enough, I had a chance to interview an NBA player this week, and he's the small forward for the Denver Nuggets. And he was sharing that a big thing that he does between contexts, particularly ones that are difficult, is he does a little bit of meditation and he does a little bit of pausing so that his brain can filter out thoughts that are actually not productive for that space. And so for folks who are like, hey, pausing sounds cool, how do I do it? We've listed a few steps. Kat, have you ever used any of these before, or any of these have any of them been helpful for you?
I mean, I use them all the time when I get upset about something. So for me, I think I don't end up using it right before the conversation. But what I use it for is when I am being irrational, which is like not infrequent. And when I'm having a irrational reaction to something, if something's making me angry, like this is so helpful to just like get back in it. And I think part of also what I think is important and what about this that Tarun's saying is like resetting yourself into this conversation. I love that you said that your manager, if you did it at the beginning, then kind of everyone was paying attention. I do think that we do this in different ways in our one-on-ones. Sometimes it's the like casual greeting and the how's it's going that brings you into the conversation, but letting go of what happened before and just being present in this conversation is like super, super important.
and we'll try a few at the end if people want to practice one or two with us. Going to keep it going to step three, which is delivery. And Jared, you said this is like actually not what most people are nervous about. So we won't spend too much time on this. This is a framework that Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor, has written. For folks who are like, okay, now how do I actually say it? Right? Ironically, that's what people think we're going to talk about in our sessions. We still wanted to give you guys a slide around this. It can be helpful to use a version of this framework where you're setting up the context, you're naming the observations, you're naming the result that you're looking for, and having an expected next step. When you do that, you tend to make it more behavioral focused versus personal focused. I can remember growing up, I'd have certain teachers that would say character-based assessments, like, you're just not this. And then there were teachers that were like, hey, you didn't do this right. And the ones that did that, I ended up wanting to be around, wanting to learn from. And so, again, small ways of figuring out delivery in a way that can really land. Kat, any reflections on this? I know we don't speak in frameworks when we talk, but I just love your thoughts. Have you,
I mean, what a thing that I like hold close to my chest always is this idea of like hearts versus spades and clubs versus diamonds. That wasn't right. Anyway, the idea is that a spade versus a club is a negative thing, and a spade is a very specific negative thing, and a club is you don't do good work. And actually what I use more often is the hearts versus diamonds. A heart is like, "Oh my God, you're so great." And a diamond is you really showed up well in that meeting and you moved this project forward in X, Y, and Z ways. So what I think about the observation is that the habit, you develop the habit always, and it's easier to develop on specific positive things, and then you have the habit and like for the negative things as well.
yeah. Yeah, it's important to reinforce the behavioral attribute that you're noticing for sure. The underrated part, for me, the hardest part of difficult conversations is actually listening. I sometimes think it's a monologue. And I'm like, I get a chance to speak at this person. I have this really weighty message to share. They've got to like let me finish and then we can make space. It is so important to listen as you're sharing the observations, as you're naming things, as you're reflecting on things. Giving people space to actually hear you is actually really, really key. And often asking a question like, hey, is this landing? Is this resonating at the end? A very genuine or simple question can actually really help. We've seen the differences between two people who are not listening and two people that are. And often the thing that makes a difficult conversation more difficult is when it feels like neither of you are really hearing each other. And all it really requires is slowing down and saying, "Hey, this is what I'm hearing. Are you noticing this? Or this is the observation I'm making. Does that resonate?" Almost checking in with them to say it sort of align on what you're both seeing. And then it's a lot easier to come to that conclusion. So listening is an underrated part of, I think, the difficult conversation. You often think it's one way. The session is not called how to have difficult monologues. It's how to have difficult conversations. And so that's a two-way listening street. I see you smiling, Kat. I don't know if what's
Yeah,
your
just kind of what I said earlier about you can't play out everything. I think my JV move when I was younger in my career was to like I really wanted a specific outcome. I like wanted them to feel a certain way or say a certain thing. And like I don't control that. I only control what I say. And so like a shift, it's not even a shift in behavior, it's a shift in like mentality is for me to come into a conversation and say like, hey, my perspective on this thing that happened is X, Y, and Z, and here's the impact it's having. What how does that compare to your perspective? And to actually care, because I think earlier in my career I might have asked that, but I would have been like, you have a distorted perspective and it doesn't matter. Like I wouldn't have
yeah.
said this out loud, but I think it was my monologue of like my inner monologue, like your perspective doesn't really matter to me here. And so to like craft this conversation in a way where it doesn't mean that I'm not necessarily firing this person, but where I actually am open and craft the conversation in a way where their responses impact how we proceed forward.
Yeah. Then it feels collaborative, right? Versus you just assigning feedback to them. It feels like they're in it with you. Again, I'm a big basketball and sports junkie, but I do know that often athletes do what's called film reviews. And so they'll review the film with a coach or an assistant coach or a film director, and they'll go through what actually happened at each stage. So they're both seeing the same visual at the same time. And that alignment can actually really help versus just being told something, right? Um, Probably the last step that it's not generally included in difficult conversation guides, but it is one that I think separates a good difficult conversation versus a great one, which is just following through. Like 2 or 3 days later or a week later, whenever you think the right cadence is, just circling back, like, hey, just checking in. What did you take away? Did that land? What's it been like since we've talked about this? Some kind of follow through motion can actually really help make people feel like you weren't just checking the box. One piece of really critical, harsh feedback I got from the first person I ever managed was she was like, it feels like feedback for you is like checking the box. Like you're just trying to make sure you're doing this versus you're really concerned about my development. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I obviously care about your development. And then I realized it was because I didn't follow through. It was like, I named one thing and the next week it was something very different. And then they weren't really, it didn't feel like we were doing something together and wrapping things up as we kept moving. And so I learned that the hard way, which is why whoever talks about follow through, I find myself really gravitating towards it. So my question, having listed a few of these steps for the group, back to Mentimeter, out of curiosity, which of these do you think come really naturally to you? Are you pretty good at preparation? Like that feels really easy. Are you actually pretty good at pausing, where like you're slowing down, you're calming down your brain? Do you think you're a rock star at delivery? Folks who are really think they're good at listening, making space. Um, and then folks who follow through. And I actually would just love to hear from people who put themselves in any of these categories. What's your wisdom? Anyone who's a great listener want to share? I want to start with that one. What's something you do? How do you create that discipline for those of you who marked listening?
I think one of the things I do is summarize what I heard. So I think it's kind of similar to reflect but don't rebut. And ask like, hey, is this my understanding? Is my understanding right? Or did I miss something?
I love that, Hemant. How do they usually respond when you say that? What's the usual response when they say that?
I usually, again, if I did accurately summarize, they'll be like, "Yep, that's accurate." And if I did miss something, they'll say like, "Hey, in addition to that, here's another thing," or they'll clarify if my interpretation was inaccurate or they intended to say something different than what I took away.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing. What about the five of you? One of you who shared preparing, would you be willing to come off mute? What is your preparation process? Is it similar to what we've described? Something totally different? Would love to hear. Quite a few listeners. Really, anyone across the board doesn't need to be just preparation. I'd be curious to hear your secret thing that you do that you're like, yeah, I could tell other grow managers this. I'd be down to share this piece of wisdom.
Another thing, and this might be more on the preparing side, but I also try to think through perspectives. Like, uh, why is my worldview this way, and what might be another worldview as a way of understanding and being open to other perspectives or interpretations.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, similar kind of thought process here. It's like when I think about having a tough conversation, what I'll do is basically rehearse it, run it through like my wife's lens, and then make sure that I have like facts. So facts are your friends when I'm having these conversations.
Thanks, JP. That's a pretty solid way of preparing. Yeah, anyone else? I see one person said follow through is their secret. Would love to hear other or their strength. Would love to hear from them too. Or deliver or people who deliver it really well. You know, so often I find that in the delivery mode, when we do the rest of this well, the delivery mode, when people are just super honest and candid, it really lands. But when they don't do the other stuff, I find the delivery doesn't land as well. Like if they're really anxious or angry or feeling these tough emotions and they come in and they deliver the feedback, it just doesn't land. It feels personal. Something feels off. When they're actually regulated a little bit and then they focus on the thing that's off, my brain is ready and eager to absorb the facts that are there. And so it is interesting. I think these things actually do feed into each other. What about places that are most difficult for you? If you were to be honest right now, what's the hardest part for you? Is it the preparation? Is it the pausing? Is it the delivery itself? Is it the listening? Is it the following through? Which part feels most difficult for you? Okay, I see some preparation. Kat, where would you say you're at these days?
I think delivery and follow through are the hardest for me. And I think it's because I really like I want to when I have a conversation, I read people and I like want them to be responding. And this is the kind of conversation where that's not like that's doesn't necessarily serve you. Like they're not going to come out happy from this conversation. So I think delivery is really a struggle for me. And then follow through is I think also a little bit it's both like sort of being a busy person and putting it on the front burner, but also I think I often feel like, oh, I don't want to nag them about it. So like I get in my head about like what the right cadence is. So it's just very easy for me to get in my head about that.
Yeah, for sure. Any other folks want to come off and share what's difficult for you now? Just reflecting on this list. I will just say to wrap this up in terms of the slide content, the closing message from our side is it's so tempting to choose perfection, which is why avoidance can be so tempting. But when you choose connection, it often makes things dramatically better. It is super normal for it to feel nervous and anxiety inducing, but a done difficult conversation, the gains of that compound with time and have compounding gains the same way that an avoided conversation does too. So we hope this message was helpful. I want to thank Kat for her time. We're around to stick around for folks who want to join, hang out for a few minutes, but I want to thank you all for being here and give you 90 seconds or so to pause between your next call so you can center yourself. But thanks all for joining for
Well, for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kat.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Yeah, thank you, Hemant, for being
Sorry, if we are hanging out, I had one question to talk through.
yeah.
I think this one goes to the the overthinking or the wanting to be perfect. Do you have any tips or tricks for how to think through or how to avoid thinking too deeply about outcomes, right? It's like your mind charts this flow chart of how things can go and all the impact that can come out of it, and then indexes on the negative things that might come out, um,
You don't,
versus,
yeah, sorry, please. I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah, I hope that made sense, but if not, happy to clarify.
You don't control the outcome. Like when people are the problem, you you don't control them. You can only control yourself and you can only guide them. And so you've probably had the experience as a manager of like realizing that there are things that happen on your team that are not your fault, you know, and so and it's an extension of that, like all you only control what you control. And
Mhm.
so focus your perfectionism on like getting the facts, getting the prep together, coming and being your best self. But what happens after that is not under your control. And no one else is going to think it is either, by the way. Like you might feel like you're
Yeah.
responsible for that outcome, but like if that person like goes on a, a rager and gets mad at, other people in the company, like no one's going to blame you for that. That's on them.
Fair enough. And then I think in that vein, I'm also curious if like how do you anchor yourself on like here's my baseline and it's unshakable. I think another way to put it is have you had to deal with self-doubt? And if you have any tips or tricks for
Constantly.
anchoring in a baseline.
Constantly. But I think that's why like for me, humility is so important. I don't mean that in like, "Oh, I'm a humble person." I mean it in a like acknowledging that I could always be in the wrong in any conversation, in any circumstance, for me takes away a little bit of the bad part of self-doubt, where like self-doubt means you can't make decisions or you feel like you're not allowed to say the thing or be in the position. You are in the position. So like you are in the position. How can you name the self-doubt and like put it out in the open and then like for me it's saying like, hey, I might not have all the facts here, I might not have the best perspective, but here's what I saw. So like I'm not an all-seeing creature and I'm
Yes.
not always right, but like here like I just only have my aperture, so here's what my aperture is saying. For me that's a really important acknowledgement. For you it might look slightly different, but I mean, the self-doubt's always there and you still have to do your job. But it's knowing that like I think putting out in the open that you don't think that you're always right and you know that there's room for different interpretations is really important for me.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Thank you. And I think it's also, I think it's been a mental block that, as you said, uh, I think when the scope of influence as a leader increases, uh, then, I don't know, it feels like a heavier burden to get everything right. But hearing that that doesn't need to be the case, even if, you grow up the ladder is very helpful. So thank you.
None of us is always right. I'm
Yep.
wrong all the time.
Yeah.
I
One
have
thing I would add to that, Kat, I know you might have to drop, but just want to say thanks for your time, Kat. Hemant, the only thing I'd add to that is I would practice some self-compassion meditation. I've been a big fan of deep self-compassion work. There's a woman named Tara Brach who's written a book called Radical Acceptance, and I
Ooh.
feel like her work around self-compassion actually really helps managers because so much of our fear of getting things wrong or imperfectionism is like this need to perform perfectly all the time. And if you can
Yep.
just let go of that need, you'll be like, all right, so what if you're imperfect, Hema? You'll be fine. It's not like it's going to ruin your career, your life, you know. But that takes a lot of training, and so I found the deepest meditation work has really helped me in that regard so much, actually, so much.
Thank you. You said accepting compassion
It's called radical
or
acceptance.
radical acceptance.
Yeah, it's very good. It's a very, very good book. I read it once
I,
a year.
Interesting. Thank you. So, and then does the book talk about the self-compassion meditation, or is that something the
It's
same?
part of
Okay.
the book. Yeah, it talks
Okay.
about it.
Thank you. Super helpful. By the way, this was great. Thank you for organizing and being here.
Of course, man. Give the kudos to Andrew. Liebendorfer.
Yep. Yeah, I'll drop him a note too.
All right. Thanks, Hema. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Tarun. See
Cheers.
you.
Bye.